John Mercer woke before dawn with dust on his lips and a hard knot in his stomach. The sky over the Texas range was still dark, but the cattle were already restless in the long pens south of camp. He could hear them shifting and snorting in the half-light. A summer storm was coming, and everyone on the drive knew it. Frank Holloway, the trail boss, stood by the cook fire with his hat low over his eyes. He watched the clouds gather far to the west like a black wall. "We need to hit the rail stop before that rain," he said. "If those cattle get soaked and scatter, we lose time and wait. We lose money." John nodded and took his tin cup from the cook. The coffee was hot and bitter. The biscuits were hard, but he ate them fast. He was young, only 22, and he had only been with the crew since spring. The pay was fair, but not steady. If this drive went wrong, he would be out of work before August was over. Ben Carter, one of the older hands, came up beside him with a strip of bacon in one hand. Ben had a wide face, a slow walk, and a habit of seeing trouble before the rest of them did. "You smell that?" Ben asked. John lifted his head. The air was still, but there was a strange edge in it. A dry smell. Hot wind. Far off, thunder rolled once like a wagon over stone. "Storm's coming in hard," John said. Ben spat into the dirt. "Storm, fence, or fool men, it all means the same thing to us. More work." The drive started just after sunrise. The herd moved in a long brown wave across the open range. Flies buzzed around the cattle's eyes. Hooves beat the dry ground and made a low, steady thump that John felt in his chest. He rode near the front with Frank, while Ben and two other hands, Eli Turner and Sam Boone, worked the sides and rear. Their trail ran toward a rail stop called Dry Fork Siding, where a buyer had promised to meet them before sunset the next day. If they made it in time, the ranch would get paid and the cattle would be loaded onto rail cars and sent north. If they were late, they would have to wait out the storm with a tired herd on open ground. By mid-morning, the sky had changed. It was no longer blue. It had turned pale and strange, with dark gray bands low on the horizon. The sun felt hot and weak at the same time. Frank turned in his saddle and looked back at the line of cattle. "Keep them moving," he called. "No stops unless I say so." John rode in silence, but his eyes kept checking the trail ahead. The land opened and closed again in low hills and long cuts of rock and brush. Mesquite trees grew thick in some places, their sharp branches twisting out like the arms of old men. Dust rose from the herd and hung behind them like smoke. Before noon, Sam rode up from the rear and pointed with his chin. "Boss," he said, "you know the old trail through Mesquite Cut?" Frank frowned. "Sure." "Why?" "Heard a new fence went up there," Sam said. "Chain Gate 2. Some rancher on the north side bought the land. Says the old trail crosses his place now." Frank's jaw tightened. "Nobody told me that." John felt his hands close on the reins. The old trail through Mesquite Cut was the fastest way to Dry Fork Siding. If they had to swing around the north road, they would lose half a day, maybe more. And the storm was coming in fast. Frank pulled his horse beside John's. "If that gate is closed, we'll see what kind of man built it. We can't waste time riding miles around a fence that wasn't there last month." John said nothing, but he looked to the west again. The clouds were darker now. He could almost feel the rain waiting inside them. By the time they reached Mesquite Cut, the land narrowed between two low ridges of stone. The trail passed through a notch no wider than a wagon road. Mesquite bushes grew thick on both sides. A shallow wash ran along the east edge, full of loose rocks and dry grass. And there, right across the old path, stood the new chain gate. It was built from heavy posts sunk into the ground, with iron chains stretched between them. The links looked new and bright against the brown dirt. A fresh sign hung on one post, nailed up straight and plain. Private Range. Keep out. John felt Frank's horse slow under him. The rest of the crew drew up behind. The cattle, pressing from the rear, began to bunch and push. "Well, that's fine," Ben said in a flat voice. "Just fine." Frank rode forward until he was a few yards from the gate. On the other side stood two men on horseback. One was a thick-shouldered ranch hand with a red neckerchief. The other was older, with a clean shirt and a hard face. Frank called out, "Afternoon!" "That gate just went up?" The older man gave a short nod. "Last week? Old trail cuts across our pasture now. You'll need to take the north road." Frank held his hat brim with 2 fingers as the wind picked up. "North road is too long. We can't make the siding before dark if we do that. The man did not move. Should have planned ahead. John felt the words like a slap. The herd behind him was growing restless. One steer swung his head and shoved into the one beside him. The chain gate rattled in the wind. Frank's face stayed calm, but John could see the anger in his eyes. He was thinking of the money, the time, and the storm. John was thinking of the same things. Then the led steer, a big red animal with a white star on his forehead, threw up his head and snorted. The chain on the gate gave a sharp clank in the wind. The steer jumped sideways, then bolted. Everything broke at once. The steer ran toward the mesquite brush, dragging 2 others with him. The front of the herd surged and swung. Dust flew up in a thick brown cloud. Cattle bellowed and shoved. Hooves pounded the ground harder. The line began to fold in on itself. "Head him off!" Frank shouted. John did not wait for a second order. He kicked Rusty, his bay horse, hard in the ribs and shot forward along the edge of the herd. Rusty lunged through the dust, ears flat. John lowered his body over the saddle horn and cut across the steer's path. The led steer swerved left, right, then tried for the brush again. John yelled, "Easy! Easy!" He swung his rope wide, not to catch the steer, but to turn him. Rusty slid on loose dirt. A stone jumped under his hoof. The steer saw the horse and turned toward the open wash beside the cut. John saw it too. The wash was narrow and rough, but it ran through a low break in the rock and came out on the other side of the ridge. It was not a good trail. The ground was loose. The turn was sharp. A tired steer could twist a leg there, but it was open, and the storm was almost on top of them. John looked back once. Frank was fighting to hold the herd straight. Ben and Eli were riding hard on the sides. The chain gate blocked the old path. The north road was too far. If they lost the lead steer now, the rest could scatter into the brush, and the drive would fall apart. John made the choice in a breath. "This way," he shouted. "Take them through the wash." Frank heard him and saw the opening. His eyes went from the cattle to the dark sky and back again. Then he gave one sharp nod. "Do it." John turned Rusty toward the wash and rode straight at the lead steer. The animal hesitated at the narrow break in the rocks. John leaned low and cracked his rope in the air. not to strike, but to push. Rusty came up beside the steer's shoulder. John kept his voice low and hard. Move. The steer lunged first. That was the only way it could work. One animal, then another, then the rest. John drove him into the wash. The first few cattle crowded in behind, and the whole herd began to follow. Their hooves hit stone, then dirt, then stone again. Some slipped. One heifer jumped sideways and nearly fell, but Ben was there at the back, shouting and waving his hat. Eli rode the flank, keeping the herd from boiling out of the wash and into the brush. The chain gate rattled and swung as the wind rose. Thunder cracked so close it made John's teeth ache. He was no longer thinking about the gate, or the ranch owner, or his job. He was thinking only about the steer in front of him, and the narrow road of rock under Rusty's feet. The wash bent between the ridges like a dark scar. Mesquite branches scraped at his chaps. Dust filled his nose. The herd pressed behind him, warm and heavy and alive. Then the rain came. At first it was only a few drops, big as coins, hitting the dirt and leaving dark spots. Then it turned hard and fast. The dry ground drank it for a few seconds, and then started to turn slick. The smell of wet earth rose up all at once. John pulled his slicker over his shoulders with one hand, while he kept the other on the reins. He could hardly see now. Rain streaked his hat brim. Lightning flashed white across the sky and showed the herd as a moving wall behind him, packed close but still together. "Keep them moving!" Frank shouted from somewhere behind him. John did. He drove the lead steer forward to the last turn in the wash. The animal slipped once on a wet stone, but John got Rusty in front of him and kept him going. The rest of the herd followed that lead, as if the dark path were the only road in the world. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the wash widened. The cattle came out onto a flat stretch of ground east of Mesquite Cut. The rail line lay ahead, a thin dark line through the rain. Beyond it stood the siding, a water tank, a loading chute, and the low shape of the station shed. John let out a long breath he did not know he had been holding. They had made it. The storm was still coming down hard, but the worst of the trail was behind them. The herd was wet and tired, but it was still one herd. No cattle had broken loose into the brush. No one had been lost. At the siding, the station agent, Mr. Willis, waved them in from under the shed roof. His hat was pulled low, and rain ran off the edge of the platform in silver lines. "About time," he called out. "I was about ready to send a man looking for you." Frank laughed once, but it sounded tired. "You'd have needed a boat." The cattle were turned into the holding pen in wet, huffing groups. The brand on each animal still showed clear through the mud. John and the others worked fast, pushing them toward the chute. The rail cars stood open and waiting, their sides dark with rain. A few hands from the station helped with the loading. Thick boards creaked. Metal clanged. The cattle balked, then moved, one after another, up the ramp and into the cars. John stayed on his horse and watched the line go by. Every time he saw a familiar brand, he felt a small, hard tug of relief. The ranch's money was still here. The drive was still whole. His job was still standing. When the last car was shut and latched, Frank rode over to John. Rainwater dripped from the brim of his hat and from the tip of his nose. He looked at John for a long second. "That was a hard ride," he said. John shrugged, though he was tired enough to fall off his horse. Had to be done. Frank gave a short nod. You saw the only way through. If you hadn't, we'd still be back at that gate. Or worse. Ben came up behind them, grinning despite the rain. I don't know which was meaner, he said. That gate or that steer. But I'd rather fight the steer. Eli laughed, then ducked his head as thunder rolled again over the siding. Mr. Willis stepped out from the shed with a clipboard wrapped in oilcloth. Counts good, he said. Brands clean. Cars are sealed. You'll get paid on this run. Frank looked at John again, and this time there was no anger in his face, only respect. Get yourself dry, he said. Then come eat. You earned supper. That night, the rain beat hard on the station roof. The sound was loud and steady, like 1,000 fingers tapping tin. Inside the shed, the men sat on crates and ate beans, cornbread, and salted meat while the cattle shifted in the cars outside. The storm had finally reached full dark, but the herd was safe, and the rail stop was busy with light. John sat near the open door with his bowl in both hands. He could see the wet shine of the tracks, and, far beyond that, the black shape of Mesquite Cut. For a moment, lightning lit the land again. He saw the ridge, the wash, and the place where the chain gate had blocked the trail. Then the light was gone. The gate was still out there in the rain, but it no longer mattered. The cattle were loaded. The brand was clear. The drive had been saved. John looked down at his empty bowl, then out into the storm, and felt the tiredest kind of relief a man can know, the kind that comes after a hard ride when the job is done and the world has not yet taken everything from you.